Pickle.
Hey, what is going on, world? This is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and I'm the host of Identity Talk for Educators live here in Addis Ababa. And I'm back here with episode 2, and I have a very special guest. And this happens to be a very good friend of mine. She is a proud Boston native, a product of the Boston Public School system. She's been in the education field as a paraprofessional, substitute teacher, and now she is an outreach director here at the Educators for Excellence organization here in Boston, but it's also nationwide. You can find this organization in 5 other cities throughout the country, in addition to Boston.
Yes.
So without further ado, let's welcome Ms. Denise Manning to Identity Talk for Educators Live. So what's going on, Denise?
Hi, Kwame. I'm so happy to be a part of your show. I love it.
Yes.
I highly appreciate and respect you, especially in your work in cultural competency.
Come on now. Don't make me blush. I appreciate it, though. I appreciate it. So look, let's get right into it. So, we have a lot of time to talk about Educators for Excellence, E4E, and all the great work you all doing as an organization. But let's get the audience to know a little bit about Denise. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So you kind of said I'm from Boston, born and raised. I was brought up in Dorchester and Mattapan, from Fields Corner over to Norfolk Street in Mattapan. Then decided to, go away for school, didn't like it, came back, went up to UMass Boston, went there for my bachelor's and my graduate degree. Love it. I'm a beacon, I guess.
Okay.
That's what they are, right? And I realized basically while I was in school that inequity was there. And I wanted to feel like I can make an impact. So that brought me to E3. And now I'm here working as an outreach director. I'm a first generation graduate. I'm college graduate, first in my family to earn a bachelor's degree and a master's degree.
Nice.
I actually love at UMass Boston or at college campuses where they ask all the first gens to stand up. And you always feel that pride and that even if you don't want it, tears will well up in the sides of your face because you're proud and your family's like, whoop, whoop. And it's yeah.
I can't even imagine. I know that was a proud moment for yourself and I'm sure for your family. This coming from a family where my father graduated with his MBA, and then my mother, she went to college as well. So that was always an expectation for us in our family. We didn't realize that there were alternative paths to careers. So
I respect that. In my family, it was a little different. My mom and my sister both had children before they graduated from high school. So they were seniors and then also with children. So it was very different. In my household, my mother always valued education. Basically said that we needed it in order to do the things that we wanted to do. And she basically instilled that value in us. But that's because she also knew that she wanted it because she didn't have as many opportunities. So she made sure that I went to I was a part of Minds Matter Boston, going to school, going outside of school, going to Tufts Medical Center, which is right down the street. I'm at the YMCA, and being there every Saturday and being a part of their mentor program, which is still in existence. And so they actually still need mentees, everybody out there, Minds Matter Boston. And that was actually how I got the opportunity to experience new opportunities. I went to Choate Rosemary Hall, which is a private school in Connecticut, through that opportunity, as well as summer classes at MIT before my senior year of high school. So my mom basically made a point that I would be experienced and have opportunities that she didn't get to experience in Boston. So she was also a Boston native. So she's also a Boston native.
Yeah. Shout out to Mama. Okay.
Hey, Mama.
Appreciate the mothers out there. Appreciate the mothers. So now I know you did teach in the Boston public school system for a little bit. Um, Obviously, you're still currently doing it, I believe, at a substitute teaching capacity.
Yes, I pick up substitute teaching days. I try to do at least like once a month in terms of capacity with my current role as an outreach director at E4A. But I try to get in there like once or twice a month. I appreciate it. I love it. I'm also a union delegate. I was elected and voted in as a union delegate.
For Boston Teachers Union, correct?
Yes, the Boston Teachers Union, yes.
Awesome. Look at you. Go ahead, girl. Go ahead. So look, so I'm sure being able to be in schools at a substitute teach capacity allows you to inform your work with E4E. Because I think in order for you to get a sense of the issues that the education system face, you have to be in the classrooms or in the schools to really witness what's going on. So I think the way you have it going on allows you to see both worlds. So.
Yes, but I mean, it's also my why. The reason I substitute teach is because it connects me to my why. Why am I doing this work with E3 or why am I in education? It's because it impacts students. And student success is like what we want to aim towards, right? So if I'm out here like not being in the classroom or like just basically talking to educators but not understanding the experiences of educators, then it just takes away a little bit of my personal authenticity. And I want to connect. And that's actually where I got my start, was being in our school system. And so I want to continue doing that as much as I can.
Right. And I think it's important for people to hear that, because I think for those who are interested in education, some people feel like the only way they can contribute in the field is to be a classroom teacher. So clearly, I know you and I, we've talked about this, but it wasn't clearly the path you wanted to take, long term. And you've been able to find a path or a lane for yourself that still allows you to contribute to this wonderful field and do some transformative work in the process. So, yes, we have to acknowledge that, because I think people need to understand that when you're in education, you don't have to be in the classroom. You can still have an impact within different capacities.
And there are one thing that we also forget about in education too is that there are pipelines within the system. So like you don't have to be a classroom teacher for the entire span of your career. You can also be an instructional coach. You can also be focused on social emotional support. There are other pathways that I don't think that a lot of people think about and contribute to outside of the classroom. But our classroom experiences are invaluable. Like classroom educators are the strongest, like dopest people that I have ever met, and like they connect to the work just so authentically that I give them props every day, which is why I'm saying like high five, it's Friday. Give it like relax, take the weekend, just to do what you need to do. And which is why I also believe in self-care. Because without self-care, how are we gonna be the best selves for our students? So just acknowledging that classroom teacher is a way, but like that doesn't also mean that we're going to become like principals or vice principals or things like that, but really acknowledging like where you feel like you have the most capacity or the most information to like make an impact. And that's right now, this is where I am because I feel like I can make an impact in this way, but that doesn't mean that I won't ever go back to the classroom or I won't like do something else. But I really want to be a part of the social change and the conversation that's happening in our school systems.
Yeah, I think that's important, because I know of some people, friends and colleagues, who decide to take a hiatus from the classroom and just do something different. Still with education, whether it's working for a nonprofit, whether it's just taking time away to spend time with family and loved ones, and then maybe a year or two later, they enter the classroom, they're refreshed, they're reinvigorated, and they're ready to do the work again. So I think sometimes we need to remove ourselves from that space and just have that time to evaluate what's going on and to decompress. So I think that's important for people to do.
I read this really great book about teacher identity that basically said something like similar. It was like being able to connect to our why and being able to like live out our values in our classrooms really like show us our path or like help us identify our path and connect our identity to our work. and how we show up. So, I mean, I agree. Like sometimes you need to take a little hiatus and then come back with that little focus in mind.
Well, gee, that book sounds quite familiar. You want to share with the audience what book you're referring to?
Oh, it's called Shaping the Teacher Identity. It was written by a wonderful teacher that I met at the Lee School in Boston, Kwame, Sarfo-Mensah. It was a very good read. I recommend it to everybody.
Yes, so that is my book, Shape Teacher Identity. For those who do not have a copy, you can always get one at Amazon right now. Get your copy today. And also you can hear more about my book in my YouTube videos, which we'll talk about a little later on, but not right now because we want to talk about E4E, which is the main reason why we're here today. So we know that Educators for Excellence, E4E, is located in 6 different cities. So I'm going to name them right now. So Boston, of course, Chicago, my home state of Connecticut. Shout out to Connecticut, 860. Gotta do that. Los Angeles, Minnesota, and New York.
Yes.
So it is.
New York.
So it is. So you have 6 chapters throughout the United States. So now you mentioned that your role is an outreach director, right?
Yes.
So can you just share with the audience what that role entails specifically?
So basically what I do is I go to schools and I connect with educators. I go into spaces where educators are to find out like what they're passionate about and see how it aligns with like the other things going on in our city and in our schools. So an example being our current campaign is fostering positive school culture. So to get this started, we actually went into schools and found out what affected positive school culture through surveys, and we offered free lunches to educators as an appreciation and thank you for their contribution to the work and just for their work with students, because that's why we do the work every day. So we went into schools and we had a survey with us and we heard from educators about like who impacts school culture. If it was principals, students, family, and community partners. So basically we do that and then we recruit members or we recruit teachers to take on leadership roles in organizing for those changes. So we are an advocacy and policy organization. So we want to learn from our community. Again, organizing, I'm an organizer. Organizing is always about hearing from the community and the constituents and the stakeholders of what's happening so that we can be informed on what to advocate for and what policy changes need to be made in a system. So my role as an outreach director is literally to hear from educators about what they would like to see changed or what's working or what's not working in our systems.
Right.
And then, and connecting them to different people.
And just one thing to mention, and I think it's important for the audience to know. So Educators for Excellence, and correct me if I'm wrong,
yes,
the organization has no ties or affiliation to any unions. It's its own entity just doing the work for educators across the nation.
Right. We are an educational nonprofit. So we have members. So we have educators who are union members. I am a union member. I am also an organizer here at E4E. So we have members that are in unions, but we are not a union. We are a nonprofit. We have 501c status, just like any other nonprofit.
Okay. Because I think it's important to note, because I know we've had these conversations before. I know when you've tried to visit some schools and they weren't as receptive, to the services of E4E because of maybe the misconception that, okay, this is like anti, union or whatever. So obviously this is going in. So this is happening in school systems that are unionized or cities where you have school districts that are unionized. So we just want to make sure we clear that misconception up so people can be more involved.
I want to be very clear. We are educators for excellence. We want to hear from educators who are working with our students. Because again, the impact that we want to make is for the success of students, right? And educators are the main voice behind that because students spend most of their time in a day in the classroom with educators who they trust to like help them along the way. So we work with educators from charter schools, private schools, public schools. So we work in different places with educators, again, to advocate on policy decisions that affect educators that impact students. So we don't officially say we're not just with union or public schools or just with charter schools. We, again, want to hear from all schools, all educators that work with students and support student growth.
Awesome. And I know you touched on this a little earlier in the conversation, but just for the audience, what are some current initiatives and projects that E4E is doing to help support teachers, parents, students, and all stakeholders of the education process? So what's going on at E4E?
Oh, so there's some big changes, or there's some big things happening at E4E. So as you know, recently, the Student Opportunity Act was passed in Boston and Massachusetts, which is the funding bill that we have all been all organizing in Boston has been focused around funding our schools. So we actually had a bill called H577, and that bill is to have more guidance counselors and school psychologists in schools to support students with mental health support. We actually had that bill sponsored by China Tyler on the bill, on the floor in the Joint Education Committee. Through advocacy actions of not only members, educators, but community stakeholders, along with Counselor Anissa Asabi-George, language for the H577, again, to get more guidance counselors and school psychologists in schools, mandate across Massachusetts, not just in Boston, but across Massachusetts, to set actual goals and numbers and ratios in those schools. That language is also now in the Student Opportunity Act. So yay, which I love, as well as and that's our Schools That Heal campaign. So we consider that a big win in our Schools That Heal campaign. Also, we are currently in our phasing of our Thriving, Not Just Surviving campaign on building positive school culture. You see that? We gotta thrive, baby. And in this one, there's 4 recommendations. It was written by 10 teachers in Boston, both public and charter school teachers. And the 4 recommendations are around restorative justice, which is just let every child learn, which means that we're not really focused on suspending students or expelling students. We're focused on having restorative conversations to get our students back in the classroom so that they can be successful. Community and family engagement, making sure that it's authentic, making sure that teachers feel like they have the tools to be successful and prepared in school culture or lead in school culture, and then creating a plan for school culture. So all of those recommendations are in the Thriving, Not Just Surviving paper written by these amazing educators. And one thing that was amazing in that process is that here in Boston Public Schools, we have a new superintendent, Dr. Caselius, and she actually supports restorative justice. She has experience working with E4E or with E4E members in Minnesota, her former work environment. Yes. So she has experience working with E4E members in Minnesota. And we were talking about restorative justice in Boston. And she was like, yes, I've heard of it. They've been doing it in Minnesota. And I was like, yes. So then you support it. She was like, I understand the positives of it. We just need to have an actual system in place where it affects school culture or where it impacts school culture in a positive way. So having more restorative conversations, she's up for it. And we've seen that in many stakeholder conversations that she's been having on the community tour, where she has engaged hundreds of community partners, parents, and educators.
Yeah, and I've been following along from Ethiopia. I know in addition to the great work she's been doing, I know Dr. Caselius recently put out, I think, a moratorium for testing because she realized that there were some issues with testing which are well documented. I mean, as a teacher, I've complained about how unfair the testing has been for students, and I believe a good colleague of mine who I used to teach with at the Lee, Mr. Colin White, actually sent a letter to I think the district, pretty much saying, hey, these tests are not even developmentally appropriate for our students, and it's not fair for us to assess them under these circumstances, we need to do something about it. But this is something that we've been talking about for years. So I'm just glad that finally some action's been done to address that. But I want to stay on the restorative justice piece for a second because, as you know, in Boston Public Schools, we have, I believe, 125 schools in the district.
Yes.
Now, not this year, but last year, Suffolk University, which has a Center of Restorative Justice, gave out a grant to 19 of the 125 schools in Boston Public Schools, right?
Yes.
My former school, the Joseph Lee School, was one of the schools to receive the grant. So we were able to get some training on restorative practices in the classroom. And just personally, I found it to be very refreshing. It allowed me to connect even more with my students. I feel like the culture in my classroom enhanced as a result of having those circles. Not that it's relegated to circles. I mean, restorative justice is a philosophy, it's a state of mind that you have to invest in as an educator. But when we have our conversations, once a week, which was on Wednesday afternoons, it was refreshing to hear some of the things that my students were dealing with. I mean, students really opened up and, allowed themselves to be vulnerable, within the safe space of their classmates. And I think that's the part that people don't recognize. It allows us to really figure out some of the factors that maybe impact their ability to be successful in the classroom academically.
Yes.
So I'm glad that now we have a superintendent, Dr. Casilius, who's really taken the time to look into that in a more serious manner, with some fidelity, because I feel like it doesn't make sense to have a district like Boston Public Schools where you have one person who is responsible for providing restorative justice trainings to the entire district. There's one person. And we know this because one person.
One person. We know this person.
And we know this person.
We know this person. You're right. That is like inequitable. It's not really realistic,
Right.
and it's not sustainable. So what we're working on here in E4E Boston is really making sure that if you need or if you would like restorative justice training in the schools that are not receiving it, like outside of the NIJ grant, the National Institute of Justice grant, which is what the Suffolk University partnered with, the NIJ grant. So outside of those 19 schools and when the grant ends, what's going to happen next? So we're looking at like what the next steps are in those phases, but also just hearing back from educators like you, Kwame, who are at the Lee schools that are part of the NIJ grant, what worked and what didn't work. So that we know how to, like, when it is rolled out as 125 schools, each school is going to look different.
Yes.
And we know from restorative practices when they're done in a classroom, not every teacher is like you. Not every teacher is able to create that safe space. So they might need more support. And what would that support look like? And how are they going to get it if there's only one person? Right? So we're trying to figure out next steps and how we know that restorative justice is important and that we do have the numbers and the data to back up that it does support student success and helping them feel like more emotionally prepared for their day.
Yes.
It can go from like saying, how are you today? To being like, okay, I understand that this happened at home. Now we're here. We need to figure out how we're going to be successful today. How we're going to help you do your best learning. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to learning. But if they're hungry, we know that students aren't going to be ready to learn, right? We know if they're dealing with an issue at home, they're not going to be ready. So what supports need to be in place for educators? Again, we know that teachers need support because not every teacher is exactly the same. And not every school environment is exactly the same. So we need to actually talk about implementation across the board. And right now, that's actually what my work is, to hear from educators about what worked and what didn't work and what they want to see next in terms of this particular issue being moved into 125 schools.
Yes. So,
and we know that restorative justice has been on the books in BPS since 2014.
Come on.
Like
now.
We know this. It is in their code of conduct. It is in the BPS Code of Conduct that restorative practices can be opted in as an alternative to discipline, not discipline, disciplinary expulsion and meetings in that way, having restorative circles so that people can talk about what's happening in the classroom and why these behaviors continue.
So then I have a question. And
Yes.
this is interesting to me because I taught in Boston Public Schools for 5 years, from 2014 up until this year. And I'm not saying that I know, the Code of Conduct is a very exhaustive list of, rules and expectations. I had no idea that restorative justice was within the Code of Conduct, which I find interesting because when you look at different schools, you hear stories about teachers and school leaders, not every school, but in some schools where they're dishing out just excessive punishments for very minute offenses, which I just find just don't make sense at all. Just illogical consequences for minor offenses. So to hear that restorative justice has been in the Code of Conduct since 2014, it makes you wonder, well, gee, why is there such a disconnect, and why is there so much pushback from teachers when it comes to restorative justice, when it's something that's clearly in our, should I say, Constitution, if you will?
It is there. So the problem is that it's listed as an alternative, right? Mm-hmm. And when you have things that are listed as alternatives, they're never usually the first step. Right?
It's optional, basically.
Exactly. And the same way it is in a circle. You did circles in your classroom. Not every student has to participate or speak in the circle. It's all about being comfortable. And that's the same way that we're approaching restorative justice. So we hope that every school will see the value in it and apply it and implement it with intentionality and with fidelity, right? But at the same time, we understand that not every school might be there or ready. So then what do they need? And how can we make sure that they get it? And so that's my job, to go into those schools and find out, hear from educators what is and isn't working and what they would like to see. I want to hear this from people who don't even know what restorative justice is.
Oh, yeah?
Because at the end of the day, it affects school culture. And again, but we know, I'm not even going to say that. I was about to say something. Nope, I'm not.
You said to yourself, all right.
But we know that there has to be some kind of opt-in process for schools to really take it on with fidelity. And even if that includes having community partners who are doing the work, like ROCA is doing restorative justice amongst their students. BSAC is doing restorative practices amongst their students. So even having other people be leaders in the work or have collaborations is important, because then you don't feel all the pressure alone is on one teacher or one team leader to be successful. And I think that's important, how to build it up from a culture perspective. It's not just one classroom, it's a team.
So the research clearly points to the effectiveness of restorative practices. That's one.
Yes.
We as educators recognize the importance of restorative practices in our classrooms. Generally speaking.
Yes.
Right.
But then you have that moment. I'm going to be very clear. Then there's that moment when you're in the classroom, you're there by yourself, and you have 3 kids that just pop off at the same time. And you are trying to be restorative, but you can't just in that moment have a circle, right? So what do you do in that moment? And I think that's where a lot of educators are asking for that support. How do we move from a restorative circle that happens on every Wednesday, at this prescribed time, to being restorative in terms of disciplinary conversations or classroom management? And I think that's one thing that we have to separate. Yeah. Having classroom management and behavior management, and then school management.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair assessment, because just coming from a school where half of the student population is on the ASD spectrum. So you have students who are autistic, but you also have other people, with special needs. So obviously the way restorative practices look in their classroom is going to be very different. And I think for some of my colleagues, whenever we had conversations about this, they always mention the fact that, they want to do restorative practices. They really do, but sometimes there's not time allocated in our schedules to go into a classroom to see how restorative practices looks in, let's say, a gen ed setting. Go ahead.
So we need coaching opportunities.
Yes.
I think that we need that in all senses, though. Like, we need it in terms of teaching cultural competency. We need it in ethnic studies. We need it in just like social emotional learning, or just having more mentorship opportunities so that we can reduce the teachers that are leaving the system and never coming back.
Right.
Just like having more opportunities for people to feel successful and grow in their practice. And I think there are a lot of opportunities through the union to actually and this is what I say, it's not about being anti-union or anything. It's about making sure that our union is working for us and holding our union accountable to us. And I think that's something that we naturally have to talk about. Accountability.
Yes.
So I hear that too, from along with restorative practices. They're like, oh, there's a lack of consequences when it comes to restorative practices. No, is consequences the word we want, or is it accountability?
Okay.
So there's a difference between, let's say, a student acting up in the classroom, and then they have there's now a more, there's no longer you can no longer keep a student in from recess as a consequence. You can no longer do that, right? So instead of having them not going to a special or anything like that as a consequence, or them having detention or something as a consequence, restorative practices actually to talk more about accountability. So what has the student done that is more restorative than them missing something? Is it closely aligned to them coming back into the room and saying, okay, to their fellow students, I apologize for the behavior that you just observed, or I apologize for stopping you from learning or keeping you from learning. Because that to me seems like accountability. It may not seem like a clear-cut consequence, but it sounds like they're taking accountability for their behavior, their actions, and they want to continue to be a part of the community. And I think that's a difference that we have to talk about when it comes to classroom discipline, school discipline, or management, is really talking about how students are now taking accountability for their behaviors and then learning from it. And I think the same thing has to be done about educators, right? We may not be able to do a circle the first time. Okay, that doesn't mean you should give up on it. It means that you come back and you try it again, and you seek other opportunities to coach, and you can request people who are doing different things well or not so well to come into your space. And then even invite students to lead circles so that we don't feel like we're the primary knowledge holders. And I think that'll help with the idea that accountability, or the knowledge that accountability is key to restorative practices.
Absolutely. So staying on this idea of accountability. So obviously restorative practices is optional in BPS, right? And at some point it should be a mandate, but that's going to take some time, to get to that level. But what I like about restorative practices is it makes the playing field equitable for the teacher and the student.
Yes.
Because, for years, it was always, you know what? I'm the teacher. You are the students. With restorative practices, it's kind of made it a bit more equitable to where, okay, as a teacher, I got to hear the students out a little bit more in order to inform my practices within the classroom. And it holds me accountable as an educator, because now, they can check me respectfully within the confines of that space and say, hey, Mr. Sarfo-Mensah, when you made that statement, it made me feel like this. Or, hey, you didn't give me a chance to say my side of what happened in this incident. So it gives them a space to really vocalize, what they're experiencing internally.
I love that you just brought that up as an example, because then it like leads to the larger conversation of how our young Black and brown students are, how they're being held in our current system, right? And I mean, when I mean that system, I mean like our school system, our criminal justice system, our life system. So being able to say through even restorative practices to say, I felt this way because you weren't able, like because of this reason, like to build up that social emotional learning piece where they can feel like, where they feel empowered to share how they're feeling, but also hold you accountable, says a lot. And that's how we continue to grow our community and teach them that respect, like about respect, accountability, but also self-respect.
Yes.
And not only that, but like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm scared in spaces where our young Black and brown men are, when they're like, the situation can go to the left. It can start off with like you being on the bus, being too loud, and then just go completely in the other direction.
Absolutely.
You don't mean it to go there, but it can go there. But then it ends up, once that incident happens on the bus, and this is how it works in Boston, once that incident happens on the bus, you're a little bit too loud, the bus will make a report. The school police can be called. The school police can then actually inform the other police, like the Boston police, and then there's something on your record. Or like they're calling your school and basically outlining it this way. And that's unfair. Like we know that there are spaces where like our students need to be students. But then there's a way for them to respectfully say, okay, I know you think I'm loud right now, but I've had a long day and I'm just hanging out with my friends. And just being able to use their words to express how they feel. And I think that's one of the benefits of being in restorative circles, or being in spaces, or being in community with our with teachers, and being in spaces with our other students, to really be able to share those feelings in a safe space, so that then you feel more confident and comfortable sharing those same feelings in spaces where you don't feel as comfortable. And I think that's something that we really need to start levering on, because I worry. I 100% worry, because I've been in Boston public schools my whole life. Like I know what the outcomes for I've seen the outcomes for our students, and they get tracked. They are tracked. So like just making sure that we are very intentional with how we talk about restorative practices and what it means to the overall social emotional learning sphere, and how deeply embedded it is to confidence, respect, accountability, just life.
Right.
Because we want to set them up for success in all the ways that we can. And part of that is just understanding that their voice is incredibly important to the conversation, or acknowledging their voice is important.
And I think that's something that needs to be said, because I mean, these students, when they go home, it's a totally different set of rules that they follow from what they have to adhere to in their school settings. And
Exactly.
for anybody who teaches in the neighborhoods that we teach in believes that the rules that we have in our classrooms and our school communities automatically translate into their home settings is totally naive about what goes on in those neighborhoods. So I do believe that it is essential to have these spaces existing for our students, so they can have that outlet to express their feelings and kind of where their mind is, at the present moment.
And acknowledging that it's trial and error. It is trial and error. There's going to be times where it does not work well, and being able to come back and reflect on that. There's a lot of reflection in restorative practices. And that's the important too, being able to come back to it and say, okay, that didn't work. Next step. You don't have to give up. It's momentum. So yes, but I think that brings us to a lot of other intersectionality points.
Yes.
And something else I wanted to share with you that IDTALK4ED is currently working on is teacher diversity.
Yes.
And how that plays into the larger issues that we're seeing in our school systems. So we actually been working with a group called Tribal, and it's Teachers Resisting Inequity.
Oh, that's my man. It's David Jones.
David Jones.
Yes.
David Jones, Janelle Falker, and Lisa Lazari, June Handy at the Homes. Janelle is at the Helen Y. Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And Lisa Lazari is a former IFRI outreach director, IFRI Boston outreach director. And it's Teachers Resisting Inequity for Black, Asian, and Latinx. And so they're working really hard on making sure that educators, all educators, understand that cultural competency is important, and teacher diversity and cultural competency work hand in hand. And that we need to really have more opportunities for teachers of color to thrive.
All right. So I'm going to ask you something, because teacher diversity is a big thing. Well, I'm
Yes.
going to say, when I say teacher diversity now, we have to talk about teacher attrition as well, as it pertains to teachers of color, more specifically Black and brown educators. I know in Boston, there was a study that was done a few years ago, but last time I checked, only about a fifth of the teacher force in Boston is of African American descent, I believe.
Is that low?
A fifth, but yet we look at the student body. I want to say there's a slight majority of students of color in Boston public schools. So there's a huge disparity there. And I know that with Boston, they've done a lot. They've tried to put out some initiatives to try to diversify the teaching force. I mean, I was a part of something that's still existing throughout Massachusetts. It's called the Inspired program, which was initiated by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE for short.
Yes.
And it's basically an initiative where they're bringing veteran teachers of color throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to pretty much come together and serve as ambassadors for the state to try to recruit students of color who are at the high school, college level to get into teaching, which I believe is a great vision, but obviously there are a lot of action steps that are required in order for it to come to fruition.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that come into place when we talk about teacher diversity. Let me ask you, how many times, Kwame, did it take you to pass your MTELs before you were fully qualified?
Okay, full disclosure. Okay, so obviously Boston is the second city where I've taught. My first 4 years I was in Philadelphia. So during my last year in Philadelphia, I had to take MTELs from Philly on a computer, because they're all computer based.
Yes.
And just for those who aren't aware, 95% of the states and territories in the U.S. use the Praxis. There are only 8 states, I believe, where they have their own state testing, and Massachusetts is one of them. So I didn't realize this when I first applied for a job in Boston. When they told me, you know what, your Praxis scores aren't going to fly, you're going to have to take these tests again, I was a bit perturbed at first, but the testing wasn't difficult for me because, I studied very hard.
Okay.
I was able to pass every single one of them on the first try, except for, and I remember it too, the MTEL 3, General Curriculum, subtest.
Okay.
The subtest for, not the math subtest, but the subtest that has all the other subjects, so studies.
Oh, the multi-subject test.
Yes.
So there's the general curriculum, and then there's the multi-subject test, and then there's the mathematics test. So the multi-subject test. I
failed that by a few points, but I took it the very next month and I passed it. So that was the only one that I didn't pass in the first try.
So, you know what? You're amazing. Kwame, you're just an anomaly of amazingness. My point is that not everyone is great test takers. So it's hard for people, especially those people of color who have been marginalized in a lot of educational settings, to be as prepared as test takers to pass these MTELs, especially when they're so in depth. A lot of the language as well can be very convoluted, difficult, or harder for people who also English is not their first language.
Oh man,
so we need to talk about like how teacher diversity, like how testing plays a part in our teacher diversity crisis, or our our teachers of color crisis. Not only that, but we also have in Boston, Kwame, I'm not sure if you knew this, we also have a sub shortage, a coverage paraprofessional shortage, and a teacher shortage.
Yeah.
And yet, it is so hard to actually make it through the system in Boston, because sometimes it feels like it's all about who you know and not about your actual ability to do the job or your passion to do the job. So we have to just start to dismantle systems in a lot of ways to bring teacher diversity to what we know it could be, or it's for it to match or highlight the needs of our students or the look of our student compared to like the look of our teaching staff.
Well, yes. And just full disclosure, there is a status quo that does exist.
Yes.
There is. We're not going to sugarcoat that. It does exist. But I do want to stay on this teacher diversity subject because I believe it plays a role in so many different ways, right?
So, by the way, it's listed on our website, on the E4E website. We actually do have the national campaign for teacher diversity. And you can actually hear stories from across the chapters on their on teacher diversity and like what their goal is in each chapter, or to bring that about. So
that's for each of the 6 chapters of E4E, they have stories in regards to teacher diversity.
The need, yes.
The need.
So, but there are definitely chapters that have more insight to it. So like New York has a larger campaign, a larger force of members that are working really hard on the teacher diversity campaign. But it's a national, all E4E is working on teacher diversity.
Right.
We just need to hear from educators, like what's working, what's not working. Like, see, that's really what we do.
I mean, who would know this issue better than us, right?
Exactly. Tell me, how do you get your friends to stay?
Yes.
Like, how do you call your friends, or like, do you have friends in Ethiopia right now who are like, yes, I'm interested in teaching in the States, and you're like, yes, go to Boston?
I haven't come across any yet, but if I do come across some, I'll definitely be sure to inform them of of what they can expect and
share your MTEL resources.
Of course, that's important, but I do want to stay on that for a second because, as you know, when we talk about testing, at least in Boston, I'm sure in other cities and metropolitan areas, there's a huge push for full inclusion in our school district, right? So when you talk about school, you talk about inclusion, obviously, we have to have a conversation about certification, with teachers, right? So just as an example, I'm certified as a middle school math teacher, but I also have a certification in teaching moderate disabilities for grades 5 through 12. And the only reason, thank you, and the only reason why I have the second certification is because, at least in BPS, there's been a push for gen ed teachers to get an additional certification. And I think for a lot of us, it was presented to us as a mandate.
Yes.
Basically, if you don't get this certification, it's not a guarantee that you'll still have your job within your schools. That's how it's presented to many of us. Whether it's true or not, that's another conversation for another day. But the tests are not easy, especially when you talk about special ed tests, special education tests for certification, whether it's for ESL teacher candidates, whether it's for teachers who just want to get into special ed. I mean, I've heard so many stories of colleagues and friends of mine failing the same test 3, 4, 5 times. Mm-hmm. And in some situations, they received a waiver. to prepare for the test for an additional year, some people don't get the waiver. Even the way that the waivers are distributed, at least in Boston, is questionable, but once again, another story for another day. But I say this to say that if we're talking about teachers who know how to teach, now obviously the test has to be one measure that we use to evaluate teacher performance, but it shouldn't be the end all be all.
Right.
And I mentioned this because I don't know if you're aware, like in Florida, I don't know if you heard this story, but a couple years ago in Florida, 1,000 teachers in Florida were on the verge of losing their jobs because they couldn't pass, I think, a certain portion of their state tests. So Florida is one of those states where they don't do the praxis. They have their own test that they do, like Massachusetts. And among the 1,000, many of them were highly qualified teachers. Some of them had won accolades for their work in the classroom. And these are teachers that have received high marks in their evaluations and high recommendations from their school leaders. And because they couldn't pass a certain portion of the test, they're on the verge of losing their jobs, which I find ridiculous. So we have to find a way to try to take into account the actual abilities of teachers in the classroom, because there are some great teachers who just can't test to save their life.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna put it out there in full disclosure. I have not taken a special ed MTEL. Like, I am not certified in special ed at all. I am licensed in high school English, grades 8 through 12, and I am a licensed infant toddler preschool teacher. I also have a background in EEC. So I've never taken the special ed test, but I have heard stories, and I have seen some pretty amazing educators feel that they're unsuccessful because they can't pass this test, and just feeling demoralized after taking it 2 or 3 times. And then we also have to remind ourselves that we're paying for these tests. This is a system. We're paying for this. We're paying to feel to do this and be certified, and hopefully it changes our teacher pay lane, or something changes. But it's a hard practice, and we have to start being more forgiving of ourselves, just like we need to start being more forgiving of students.
No, you hit it right on the money. These tests are not cheap. And every time you fail, you got to pay that fee once again, the full fee.
The full
fee. That's why I think for me, that was my motivation for testing. I was like, nah, man, I'm not paying that fee again. I'm going to pass this test on the first try.
I wish that was my motivation.
I have to, because ain't no way I'm paying another $100+ to register for this same test that failed by a point.
In all these ways, testing is a business. When we test students, we're trying to get something, but it's a business. When you're testing teachers, it's a business. So we have to really just start, even Kwame, are you sure you don't want to start a study group? I'll be a part of your study group for moderate disabilities.
Denise, I have so many ideas, as flowing through my head, but I'm the type I'm a big person. I'm a big picture guy. I have the big ideas. I have the big picture, but you know what? Sometimes you need that person to tell you, listen, Kwame, this is great, but let's bring it down. You got to do it step by step. That's me. I'm the
that's good.
Big ideas guy. And sometimes
I'm closer to the step by step. I'm closer to the step by step. So I'm okay, Kwame, this is your idea. All right. How can we actually make it so that this group of educators feels like they can do this, our group of educators feels like they can do this, and we're all happily in success. Yes. So we really just need to focus on making sure, having actual pipelines so that teachers actually are coming into our system. Teachers of color are coming into our system.
And
So there's new initiatives in both Boston Public Schools and the union to support having teacher diversity,
yes.
as well as in E4E. So like this is, everyone is talking about this because we see the need and we see the impact on students. The question is that Boston has been under this mandate for decades.
Oh
When
yeah.
are we actually going to meet it?
Yeah. There's a
So
lot
it's
of
like action. So thank you for your big picture. Kwame, tell me, how can we get more teachers of color to come into Boston?
I think just how do we get more teachers in general to come to education, not just in Boston, but just throughout the nation, because it's not just Boston. You know,
We elevate teacher voice, make
yeah.
sure that they're involved in stakeholder conversations, and then we make sure that they are being paid equitably in a system where they can live.
Yes. The pay is super important. Obviously, when we get into this profession, we don't do it because of the money.
No.
It's not because of the money, because we know going into it that we're not going to get paid a whole lot.
Right. But we should be able to live and support our families.
Yeah, absolutely. There should be some type of incentives built in to draw us into the profession so that we can have a sustainable, life and be able to provide for our families. That is very true. And
so many of my teacher friends have second jobs. I know when I was working as a parent, I had a second job. I had a third job. I had a second and third job. I went to work after work, and then I worked on the weekends. Like, you have to be able to hustle.
well, I know for myself. So my wife and I, we're both career people. So my wife works in the health industries, public health industries, and I work as an educator. So we're bringing two incomes in. And we also are homeowners, which is very rare for Black folks, especially in Boston, where there's a whole lot of gentrification going on.
Yes.
So to be a Black family who owns a home, has a career, married, okay, and also we have a dependent, we have a child. One child, right? You would think we should be living large. We should be okay. But even with the double income and our son, right? And the education that we have between the two of us. I mean, she has 2 master's degrees.
Yeah, Natalie.
I have a master's degree. She went to Wellesley. That's like Ivy League for women. Prestigious women's college. I go to Temple University, right?
Prestigious college.
Prestigious college in Philly. Shout out to Temple, go Owls. Obligatory shout out. But I say all this because we have all these things going on, and yet we still live paycheck by paycheck to pay the mortgage, to pay our utilities. I mean, that was the life we were living. And we still got nervous around the time that, we had to pay for bills. So and we're an educated family, educated Black family. So imagine if we're struggling like this and we got it made. Imagine how the struggle is for people that don't have half of what we have.
I'm one of those people, Kwame.
Yes.
I'm one of those people. But it's also just like outlining how, but see, part of that too, I'm going to put that out there, Kwame.
Yeah.
I respect what you've done. It's wonderful, amazing. But we also need to define what success looks like individually.
That's true.
And within a system.
Yeah.
So we know that there are systematic policies that need to be changed when it comes to banking, housing, and just income, right? Income inequality. I'm a Black woman. I know that I know that in certain spaces I make less than white women as well as Black men. So there are things that there are systematic things that we need to change and continue to advocate for. At the same time, we need to be I am being more forgiving of myself. Just because I'm not a homeowner right now doesn't mean that I'm not successful.
No.
Right? So just being like able to outline what success means to each of us, and then fight and advocate for the things that we want to see in our lives. And I think that's the same way we need to look at how we view homelessness in Boston, gentrification, our criminal justice system, our inequitable immigration policies. Like, so many things are just so intersectionally connected, that really just affect how we can thrive in this world. And I don't know about you, Kwame, but I want to thrive. Like, I'm tired of just surviving. I want to thrive.
Don't we all want to thrive? Man,
How
that's
can we thrive together as a community and build community in the same process? So that's what I want to hear from. You tell me how we can do that.
How are we going to thrive?
Yeah, how are we going to thrive and build community amongst ourselves?
Well, in order for us to thrive, it has to involve the community. I mean, that's one. We have to involve the community. We have to empower the community to see that, hey, we need y'all. We need y'all to be a part of this process, because I feel like for certain parents and for certain community members, they don't feel like they can contribute because they feel they have this misconception that they have to have a certain level of education or expertise in order to contribute in a valuable way, which is so far from the truth. I mean, if anything, they are the key. Our community members are the key to changing our education system. The problem is, whether it's as a district or as a state, depending on where you go, different cities, different towns, we don't always do a great job of reaching out to our parents in regards to things that are going on within our community. We think about even the Build BPS campaign, where you have all these schools being closed down, and now you're trying to consolidate students in different schools. There are parents who had no idea this was going on. And yeah, you could put it online, you could send, letters out to different residences, but let's keep in mind that for some families, they move 2-3 times a year. So maybe that address you sent it to was maybe their address from 2 homes ago.
Right. Like, and sometimes their phone numbers will change just as quickly too.
Change too. Like, this is the reality of kind of the population we work with. They don't have like a stable, they don't always have the stable housing situation to where, all right, if I send something to this home, I can assure that it's going to get to the families. It doesn't always work that way. So I think we have to be more innovative in the way that we engage with the community.
Agreed. Which is why I was really excited that Dr. Caselius went on community tours during her first 100 days. And that was really exciting to see. I went to about, I want to say 4 or 5 of her community tour events, and you would see parents, community stakeholders, and some students thrown in, and they came like prepared with questions. And I saw some people that I've seen from like parent site council, school site council, like faculty senate. There were people from different like stakeholder groups there to represent and to get their questions asked. And I thought that was wonderful to see. So that's why whenever I talk to a parent, I'm like, oh, did you bring that to parent council? Like, have you talked to anyone? Like, I'll be like, oh, I know this person. She runs she's on citywide parent council. Let me put her in touch with you. So then it's like, again, making connections and networking is really important to how we share information.
Yes, we have to do that.
So again, sometimes it's just about connecting. I have no problem getting into a room with a few different people and be like, yo, go see him over there.
But that's how we thrive as a community. When we outreach, when we have the outreach, like that, right? We're winding down to the last few minutes, and we've had a great conversation about restorative justice, teacher diversity, the importance of bringing the community in as stakeholders in this process, and it's just so much that we need to hear.
And I hate to like keep on putting it out there, but community and family engagement is actually one of the recommendations in this paper. You see that?
Okay.
It is number 3. Engage families and communities, reduce barriers to meaningful family and communication, share best practices. Yes.
Okay, let me make this easy for you.
It's there.
Because that was actually my next.
Again, all these things are building culture.
Yep. Let the people know how they can support E4E.
Yes.
You let them know the website real quick for E4E so they can look at all this cool information.
So it's e4e.org. E4E.org. The number 4, E.org.
All right. Y'all heard that.
That's it. And then from that site, you can go to the different chapters. Yep.
All right. So check it out. E4E.org.
Kwame, I miss you.
I miss you too. And hopefully when I get to Boston, we'll definitely connect, because we got to keep this conversation going. And I mean, E4E among the...
I know you have your big ideas. I want to hear them so that I can break them down.
No, we gotta get those out there. But as you already know, I appreciate you for what you do, the work that E4E is doing in Boston and beyond, and I just hope that you all continue to thrive as an organization and continue to advocate for those who don't feel like they have a voice in our communities. So I appreciate y'all for doing this.
Thank you so much, Kwame. And thank you for having me on your show. It's really a great opportunity to just share the work that we're doing, and also just to, be in community with you and all of your followers.
Yeah. And that's what this show is all about. So if you want to hear more interviews with phenomenal educators throughout the United States and beyond, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. It's just my whole name, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And you can also connect with me on Facebook at Identity Talk Consulting, Instagram at Kwam, Kwam _the_identity_shaper, and Twitter at Identity Shaper. So we definitely want to keep the conversation going. If you have any thoughts or perspectives or even ideas for future interviews, or people you want to recommend that I should interview, please drop it down in the comment section below. I want to hear from you all, because this is a space for us. This is a space for us as educators so that we can be real about ourselves and be real about the change needs to happen in our school communities. So on that,
and the change should start with us. The change has to include us. It has to include us. And I mean us as in educators. It has to include educator voices.
There it is. It's got to include us. So on that note, this is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and this is Ms. Denise Manning.
Thank you so much.
Off. And we're going to check y'all out another time. So until then, have a great day or night wherever you are, and God bless.